The Dark Side of Red Riding Hood is a horror visual novel made on RPGMaker by Cheron, an indie Japanese developer known for their classic yandere games like Yanderella or Mixor. As you could probably tell by the title, this is another one of those like over the top horror interpretations of classic childhood stories, where the whole point is to take something which is normally very innocent and happy and make it super over the top horrific for pure shock value. Despite the trashy nature of the genre, concept, whatever you want to call it, I think there are enough interesting and unique elements in how this game uses the concept to make it interesting, to make it stand out in relation to most other examples of this type of story. The first elements which make this game specifically unique are obviously the art style, which you could probably tell just by looking at the screen, as well as the structure, as instead of being one simple like horror spin on the classic Little Red Riding Hood story, this is more like a compilation of various ways in which the original story could go wrong, essentially. And surprisingly, not all these ways are necessarily horrific. As for example, when the story starts, obviously it starts off very similar to the original tale. You, playing as Little Red Riding Hood, are told that your grandmother has fallen ill and that you should visit her. You're warned to be careful of the wolf that prowls this forest path, as well as to not stray from the road. And if you don't take any detours, if you actually obey this advice, the story of the dark side of Red Riding Hood ironically concludes with an even more ideal ending than the original story. As while the game will call you out for essentially going the boring route, the story simply ends with Little Red Riding Hood arriving at her grandmother's home and having a pleasant time with her. However, when the game starts to show its true colors is when you disobey this advice from your mother and actually take one of the 5 detours possible scattered throughout the forest. If you go on the first possible detour, you arrive at the game's first true or dark ending. And the same thing happens, so I don't have to repeat myself, for the second, third, fourth, etc. detours. On the first detour, when you arrive at your grandmother's home, Little Red Riding Hood pulls out an axe and murders her. And you're kicked back to the beginning, where an extended version of the original warning from your mother is shown, in which it is revealed that your mother actually loathes your grandmother and is using this as an opportunity to essentially use you to kill her. On the second dark ending, Red Riding Hood gets lost in the forest, and upon reaching into her basket in order to see if there's anything that can help her survive, any food for example, it is revealed that the basket is full of rocks, heavily implying that this was always what was intended to happen, that your mother essentially gave you that information that you should absolutely not deviate from the road in order to get you to, in your childhood curiosity, deviate from the road and get lost. On the third route, you encounter the woodsman slash hunter of the story, which once again warns you about the wolf and asks where your grandmother's house is in order to, in his words, protect her, given the dangerous wolf that is roaming. And one of the interesting things about this ending is that while you listen to scary noises, each time you approach your grandmother's house, no matter which route you take, even the quote unquote good one, in this one you can hear distinctly bestial noises, really implying that the wolf is nearby. But the wolf is not an actual wolf, as you discover. As when you actually arrive at your grandmother's home, you discover that she has been killed, with a hunter being by her side, saying that he wasn't fast enough and that the wolf got to her first. When you point out this obvious lie and say that he was the one that actually killed your grandmother, he forces himself upon you, revealing that he is not actually a hunter of animals, but a hunter of little girls like you. And he even threatens that if you don't want to be hurt like your grandmother was, that your only option is to become his sex slave as he tears off your clothes, revealing that the wolf was unfortunately all too human in this case, and capable of much more evil than simply eating you. On the fourth ending, there's also another human wolf, but this time in the form of your actual grandmother, as in that classic scene where you question why your grandmother's eyes and ears and hands are so big. The usual final response of the wolf is given, but by your actual grandmother, which is revealed to be a cannibal. In fact, an even more disturbing implication is made afterwards, in which reveals that Little Red Riding Hood is possibly not her mother's biological daughter, and that her mother actually adopts various girls in order for, in this route at least, specifically send them to your grandmother in order for them to be purposefully eaten by her in order to satiate this disturbing hunger or craving of hers. In the fifth and final dark ending, you don't find your grandmother at all. And in fact, when you arrive at her empty house, another man reveals that this was actually all a ploy, like a fake story given to you by your mother in order to hide the truth that you actually have been sold as a proper slave this time instead of a sex slave to this man in order to work in pretty inhumane and brutal conditions until you either die or get pretty close to it for his business. And the thing that, again, makes this stand out, despite being, at the end of the day, just a very over the top like story, taking this childhood classic and making it unnecessarily horrific just for shock value like so many others, is how this is done. Because if you notice, in all of the endings there is no real wolf, monstrous or otherwise. The wolf in the stories is always human, be it in the form of your mother, in the form of strange men, in the form of your grandmother, or even yourself. The evil is always a human, which is an element that is very interesting to me, that they took out what's essentially the monster of the story and managed to make the story all the more disturbing, and for it to hit all the closer to home, even despite that, or even because they took out the monster, which is just a really cool detail, which is very unique to this game. And again, something that, despite the obvious criticisms that can and should be made, is something I believe should be commended. And that makes this more worth your time than, again, other examples of this kind of story. And that will be it for today. If you like this video, please do all the normal YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, etc. And I genuinely do hope to see you next time. If you really liked it, I'd also really appreciate if you could support me financially, either through a one-time paid comment donation or by joining my membership, where for $1 a month, you get to participate in exclusive polls in order to decide which videos I'll make next. Like, which of my plans should I focus on? Which of the content I have in mind do you want to see first? That kind of thing. As well as get your name put in this fancy little screen right here. Just as a small gesture of appreciation, exactly for your monthly support. But of course, no matter how much you choose to give me, as well as if you choose to give me anything at all, do know that I really appreciate any cent you're willing to throw my way, as well as just the fact that you're watching this video up to this point at all. But with all that stuff out of the way, I think it's finally time to, as always, bid you guys farewell. Obscure Anime out.